Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're based. My name is Onnagh Van Den Berg, and welcome back to another edition of the AML Watcher webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing an incredibly interesting discussion point, which is the unique and persistent challenge that we have in respect of name screening when it comes to different language variations. Today, we're going to be focusing on Arabic naming conventions, but this discussion can translate also to the challenges we've seen both with pinyin and Hanzi characters from the Chinese language. So without further ado, I would like to quickly introduce our two esteemed speakers today. And then we're going to kind of touch base on some of the key challenges we're seeing, and then we're going to deep dive into those thematic areas. So first, I would love to introduce you to Nader Timani. Nader, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Definitely. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm looking forward for this webinar to share our insights together. I'm a financial crime compliance expert with 9 years of experience in the financial industry, in addition to one of the big four companies specialized in risk assurance, compliance programs, and board consultancy related to training programs. In addition to that, I'm a certified trainer in compliance with more than 9 years, with more than 9 certifications, prestigious certifications in the market, and I'm looking forward to share insights to enhance the sanction screening systems and to benefit the community from our experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nader. And secondly, we also have Nitin Parmar, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Onnagh, thank you. Yes, I'm Nitin Parmar. I'm an ex-global head of compliance at Standard Chartered, and I focused a lot on emerging markets, so very familiar with name screening and the challenges, globally. And of course, we've had great operations in the Middle East and that area for a while, and especially North Africa. So the experience has been there. In the past, I've also been a partner at PwC and at Deloitte. But right now, I'm focusing on the wider non-financial risk changes. So I believe that financial crime on its own has to be looked at from a wider context of all non-financial risk, and bringing some of that, into the discussion and looking at, complacent controls that we have, complementary controls, that we have are really critical to the success of this. So thank you, Onnagh.
Absolutely, Nitin. And you couldn't have said it better. I think that's one of the biggest changes that we're seeing now in the industry. We've become incredibly siloed in our approach to risk management, and in particular, non-financial risk management. And by breaking down the controls into silos, you could say that we've lost sight of the wood for the trees, in that we've segregated all of our data sources within our organizations. And in order to maximize the benefit of understanding the behaviors and typologies and the profiles of our customers and potential risks, and also cross-selling opportunities, we need to bring all of those data points together to holistically manage risk. So it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. Maybe that's the next webinar we should do. But it is absolutely true. So today we're going to be talking about name screening and why it is such a persistent and unique challenge for the Middle East and North Africa region. Obviously, there's a complex mix there of linguistic, cultural, and technical factors, which we're going to talk about. In particular, kind of naming conventions, transliteration issues, weak data quality, and kind of cross-border sanction exposure. And one of the things that I'm hearing more and more from organizations is they're not so much concerned about the direct sanction this direct sanctions exposure, because we're pretty okay, we're pretty good with that. Rather, it's the RCA, the relationship and close associates, that really is posing a concern. And obviously, where screening is so important is identifying that nexus, because we're correctly identifying the initial target to start with. So without further ado, we will jump into some of the questions. Please, everybody, feel free to ask questions throughout this session. We want this to be as engaging and as fun as possible. I know we're talking about sanction screening. So first questions first. Transliteration issues. Different languages and different alphabets, whether it's Arabic, Persian, really affect name matching accuracy. Nitin, obviously, in your previous role, you were kind of head of compliance, and this is an ongoing challenge that you would see. Can you talk about, without naming any names, some specific examples of screening situations that have posed unique challenges because of naming conventions?
Yes, thank you, Una. I think, Una, your introduction also saying that this applies to other languages is also true, right? So the Chinese and other languages have very similar issues. But perhaps more pertinent to MENA, there's unfortunately a bias in name screening, sanctions, and terrorist lists with individuals from the MENA region. And unfortunately, many names sound very similar, or actually are the same, spelled correctly, and may even come from the same location. And I recall a situation where an individual from the MENA region was identified through some of the name screening logic, and they were identified as hitting a terrorist financing link. And as you know, in most cases, it's a zero-sum game when you're on that list of not to do business. But upon really getting into it and looking at the alias, we found that the alias was the same as the terrorist. And, there was a lot of interesting issues in this name. But the reality was that this was a major UBO director of $100 million relationship, and actually they were not related. It's just that the fact that these names sound the same, some of the other information was the same, and really what could have done better was what could have helped the organization rather than manually find a lot of this out is actually apply, advanced interview resolution and other techniques that would reduce the likelihood of the false positive coming out in the first place.
And in reducing that likelihood of false positive, actually, my daughter was watching Modern Family yesterday, just a little kind of antidote, and it was the episode where Manny, who's like a 12-year-old boy, had been taken in by customs because his name was on a no-fly list, and obviously it wasn't to him; it was a 45-year-old man that was on the list, and he was 12, and he's like, "Wait a second, I was only 4 when you're talking about this." What are the data points that we're really struggling with in correctly identifying? Is it date of birth? Is it common names? Where is the real struggle that we're seeing in the industry?
I'll take a shot at this, Nader. I'll get your view on this one too. But I think for a long time we've just relied on date of birth, place of birth, names and other things. But I think there's always a lot more contextual information, right? It's sometimes their job history, sometimes where they've been to, and other contextual information will help really reduce it. And I think the age of contextualization now is much more critical than just relying on brute force tactics of just relying on some similar data points that everyone else is using. Nader?
Yeah. Actually, for this question and related to challenges, I think there should be a revolution in how system providers are tackling this issue, because we are talking about Western system providers. They are coming here to the MENA region and trying to implement their systems through clients. However, they are not amending their transliteration table. They are not amending their fuzzy logic to be robust. They are not doing a data validation related the structure of the names here in the MENA, because here in the MENA, certain countries have fourth character for a name. Some countries, they have 3 names. Let's say the first name, the middle name, or the surname. So this combination should be done between the client and the system provider in order to enhance these issues and in order to minimize the false positive hits. In addition to that, there should be an integration between data points, as you said, and in order to conduct a bottom line testing, which is how we can minimize the false positive hits to a range, not to have beside it a false negative hit in order that can kill us or can kill the institution. So we need to ensure that the system provider is understanding the structure of the names and the fields here that we are having in the MENA, and they are altering the transliteration table accordingly and implementing machine learning techniques here in order to minimize the false positives, because in order to increase financial inclusion and the hype of virtual asset service providers and all of that, you need to be efficient in managing certain hits. So I think it will be a real revolution in how it is tackled from the top before managing certain hits or certain leaks in the systems.
Yeah. I love that you both mentioned contextual data. And if you don't mind, without sounding like I'm going through a training exercise, I would like to actually to talk about each one of these kind of in their own kind of in their own challenge. So date of birth, you've mentioned that already. Obviously, there is inconsistent formatting in legacy systems with data, either date, month, or month, date. And often this is missing in screening systems. So I think that's one of, I don't know if you'd both agree, that's probably one of the key challenges that we're seeing, especially in legacy data.
Yeah, definitely here, because in the Arabic countries there is no a certain repository for all the full names data and or for the data, and the system is not integrated to certain registries. So I believe that certain public-private partnership between financial institutions who are using the system with certain public registries that have all the data of the names regarding date of birth, place of birth, and all of these aspects will help to minimize the false positives accordingly.
Do you think we're doing better on, country of origin data within the screening systems? Region-specific sanctions or PEP lists. Muhammad Ali in Egypt wouldn't be the same as Muhammad Ali who's based in Pakistan. So,
Yep.
are we seeing those region-specific data points captured in the systems? Are we doing better in terms of the data that's being fed in?
Actually, we are doing it better in certain data points that you mentioned regarding stating, differentiating certain names in different countries. However, as you mentioned, certain names that are closely like Muhammad or Muhammad, it's written, it's still the systems need to be working more on their algorithms, on their machine learning in order to tackle these issues and to be more efficient and to ensure that there is a model risk management regarding these systems, how they are managed accordingly, starting from validation, the data that are entered on the systems, their transliteration table, their model, their fuzzy logic, their strings that they are using, how to string the name accordingly. So it's very essential to do.
And can I ask as well, and maybe this one for you, Nitin, one of the challenges that I've seen over the years is institutions using aggregated lists for screening from multiple sources, whether it's OFAC, UN, local regulator, but all kind of data dumped into one system for screening. And then when a hit comes up, the question I have is, well, what's the source? The source hasn't potentially been tagged. Are you seeing that challenge of lists without provenance, so to speak, making it difficult to prioritize or investigate matches?
I agree. I think there's a couple of problems with lists. First of all, I think we have to say to the companies that using a single list, no, that's not a good idea, because you may well actually benefit from using multiple lists anyway and validating the assumptions. Second, you're not always sure how often the source has been updated, right? Because some people can come on and off lists, right? That happens a lot too. But the bigger issue, as you rightly put, is really the provenance of the list. Is, when was it created? When was it last updated? Who updated it? Who is an official source? So where is it validated from? And then look at priorities, because you will have a bank or a financial institution policy in place first. Then you'll have local lists, right? So each country also produces their own local lists, and they can be white lists as well as black lists, and then only rely on global lists as a third step. And I understand that there is a sequence to doing this, right? But again, never rely on a single list. Because that often leads you to problematic issues.
Absolutely. One of the things we'll actually do after today's session is where we will share just a PDF template, which actually gives you a contextual data checklist where you can, after this webinar, go back and actually check against your data with some known names under kind of name data, date information, geographic identifiers. So you can really assess whether or not the data feeds that you're using in your system are capturing all of the key identifiers that we need. Sorry, apologies, Nadir, I interrupted you.
No, just I want to here put a point regarding local watch lists. Here in the MENA region, the local watch list is sent as a hard copy to the banks or to the financial institutions, and each financial institution is inputting the local list on their systems. However, in order to enhance this and to close the loopholes, financial intelligence units or whoever the law enforcement is responsible for that, they should have an integration exchange through blockchain. We can be very here smart in that thing to have a blockchain technology between the financial intelligence unit and and financial institutions to integrate these local watch lists and to ensure that it is unique and it is credible and it is complete on the whole financial institution. And this will enhance accuracy and enhance that there is no loopholes for criminals or for sanction parties that they are trying to evade sanctions or trying to enter the financial market.
Can I ask just on that point, one of the questions I was asked actually last year, somebody asked me a question about whether or not that I feel KYC is doing the job that we had hoped it would do. And my response was, without digital identity, I can tell you whoever I am, and you're going to believe it based on the contextual data that I've provided to you. So without digital identity, KYC in itself can be meaningless in some instances because we haven't got verifiable sources. So this integration with technology is all well and good where we have that digital identity in place, both for individuals and corporate entities. But the biggest challenge we're seeing is with those jurisdictions where even in a corporate registry perspective, we haven't moved. Indonesia is a great example. Corporate registries are still kept at a state level as opposed to a country level. So there are. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about that? We're not looking to kind of solve all the problems today, but can you talk a little bit about those challenges that practitioners are dealing with day to day, and the ways in which potentially public-private partnerships and information sharing could really help in that regard?
Definitely. Just here, I want to contribute for 1 minute, then Nitin will handle this after me. Just I want to say that here the main issue is that they think that fighting financial crimes is the responsibility of financial institutions, which is this is the backfire on everything and backfire on the community. We need to ensure that there is a public-private partnership between designated non-financial business professions, between public registries, to have a beneficiary right owner registry for companies integrated as an online streaming with all the parties that are working in the financial market. So this harmony between the public and the public and private sector is not yet mature in these markets. And this is making them in a very bad situation when they are exposed to mutual evaluation reports with FATF, because FATF is targeting a public-private partnership. So it should be a mixture between the technology and certain amendment on the policies and procedures between this integration and harmonization, and we'll be in a better place.
Yeah, thank you. So I added a couple other things. I think that what we've got to be careful about, and I think Onnagh pointed out, was with digital inclusion, right, or digital identity and KYC systems. We've got to be careful about emerging market countries where people are not fully digitized or not digitally savvy, because we're going to have a financial inclusion problem otherwise on the table. Right? Screening, right? Look, if we get 70 to 80, even 90% of your people digitally screened, fine, right? But we're going to also have the manual processes that for those people who do not have a digital identity, do not have a digital footprint, right? They're not left out of the system, right? And there's verifiable ways in which to identify that they are the people they say they are. Because even in the most remote villages in certain countries where people do not have something, there are identifiable mechanisms to identify who they are, which family they belong to, which street they belong to, which road, what kind of job they have, along those lines. So I think it's really important to never lose that context. I think we're probably another generation or two generations away before everyone can actually use a smartphone.
Yeah.
Since you kindly opened the can of worms on public-private partnerships and data sharing, Nader, I do think it's important that we touch on it, because it's actually one of those kind of, for me, those pressure points that really kind of starts to get me a little bit frustrated, in that I hear over and over again at multiple different industry conferences and working groups discussions around public-private partnerships. But what I really fail to see is results. And what I mean by that, and there was even a discussion point coming out of Ireland, and I know obviously it's a separate geographical region, but it's about GDPR and data sharing because of data privacy. And I think one of the big challenge we're seeing over and over again is there isn't a formal governance framework in place. And even when that begins to be developed between regulators, law enforcement, financial institutions, tech providers, and society, the challenge that we're seeing is that there is a real lack of kind of clear roadmap and prioritization of like, what is it that we need to do? Because we cannot, Nitin, you hit the nail on the head there. There are things that just are not mature enough yet in the market for us to be able to leverage the data that we need. So we need to have a clear prioritization roadmap of where the key risks, whether that's industry, sector-based, certain sectors, community, etc. We need to have those kind of dialogues and discussions in advance. This will not be a one-size-fits-all solution. And what I'm really seeing is the lack of development of a kind of a joint risk register where people are really clear on, as I mentioned, the prioritization of risk and how we're prioritizing that roadmap. So in terms of enhancing data sharing capabilities, I think sometimes we need to kind of go back to basics in a lot of these public-private partnerships and saying, yes, we all get the theory and the understanding of what it is we want to achieve, but we really need to run sandbox initiatives that we can pilot and scale the innovation and look at areas that we need to develop. To Nitin's point, in some locations we're maybe one, potentially 2 generations away from everybody having a smartphone, and that's the reality in some, developing countries. So how are we going to make sure that we develop these joint intelligent products in the right way, invest in education, and make sure that we're laying the right legal and policy foundations? And I'm not asking you to solve all the world problems here, Nader, but at this kind of maturity of public-private partnerships, we're not at a stage yet to mature it. We're still at its infancy. So could you maybe talk to that?
Actually, here, as you said, based on my theory or based on what I think, governance is the basics for everything, even in managing a financial crime compliance program or even managing a system from a system provider. So here we need to start by a steering committee in each country, we can say, that can manage the relationship between certain ministries, certain registries, as a public registries with the institutions that we have. In addition to that, certain regulators should have a sandbox, as you said, not to limit it just only to as a product for an financial product. No, we need to have RegTech also for a sandbox for RegTech in order to ensure that these innovations, these people are using their skills and also in RegTech, not just in FinTech. So this combination should have a steering committee governing these initiatives on a personal level, on a training level, on an awareness level, in addition to have an integration between all of that in order to start implementing that. Because as you said, we always hear that private-public partnership is essential to have a robust financial crime compliance framework worldwide. However, it's not implemented yet. Because there is, as you said, there is no governance and integration between RegTech, sandboxes, and awareness and in the private and the public sector. So this integration should happen one a day. So this is the main challenge.
Yep. And there are some success models. If we look at the UK, we have Gimlet.
Okay.
Singapore, we have the AML and CFT industry partnerships, the ASIP. In the Netherlands, we've had the FIU-NL, which is really showing effective data exchanges between banks and the national FIU. And then obviously Australia, in terms of scams, they really are at the world leader in this, in my personal opinion at the moment, in terms of Fintel Alliance, where it's a co-location of government and private sector for real-time responses to identifying scams, developing financial crime typologies, so that we can better protect the general public. So there are definitely models that are beginning to work. But as you rightly said, we need to begin at the base point and develop that maturity and also help locations that still are struggling to get those data points because of a lack of digitalization as well.
Yep.
So Onnagh, I think you hit one of the points that we were discussing earlier. I think that too many name screening and sanctions organizations are too siloed. When you talk about scams, we got to put name screening and sanctions people with the fraud people, because then we can actually identify the name scams going on and things along those lines. Actually join that data up together.
Couldn't agree with you more. Honestly, I actually said this a few months ago. And I got a response from one individual who said, for people that think that fraud teams and financial crime teams, well, like KYC teams should coexist, they don't understand the nuances of the different areas. And the point is, the financial crimes that we're seeing today are no longer siloed. It's no, financial crime is an umbrella term for AML, CFT, tax evasion, data protection, cybersecurity, fraud. But all the financial crime typologies we're seeing nowadays are, majority of them, a combination of different elements.
Convergence.
Yes. Absolutely convergence. And we need to bring those teams together to leverage off the expertise within them. So together we can innovatively find solutions to better identify developing typologies real time. And we have, Nitin, to your point, we've been totally siloed in the past, separated. I think fraud in some instances sits within the operations team. KYC will sit potentially within operations back office. Data protection will sit with legal. It's everything. It's cybersecurity with the technology team. So everything gets separated out. Data protection with the data protection officer. So
and no data integration. No data integration between all these.
Yeah, multiple sources.
In order to take a decision, well-defined decision. Yep.
I've been dealing recently with a few victims of scams. And one of the things that we find is that, either fraud and or transaction monitoring alerts didn't occur. And what's really interesting, exactly to the point on convergence, never shall those two departments speak to each other. The fraud department, they're identifying this real time in the transactions. And in many jurisdictions, there's a different reporting requirement for that in terms of timelines. And then obviously there's the other transaction monitoring department. They are not sharing data. They're not sharing alerts in terms of typologies, trends that they're seeing. And it sounds ridiculous, but this is happening real time. And obviously, Nitin, working in large international organizations, it's easier said than done to get this convergence.
Correct. I would say that the larger the organization, the higher the empire builders you got to tackle. Right.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Okay, so we've kind of, I wouldn't say we've jumped into public-private partnerships. They're back into name screen. I'm liking how we're doing this, gentlemen. We're bringing it right back again. So let's talk a little bit. One of the things actually I'd like to talk to just on screening is expat workers. And this is something that we're seeing time and time again, the different ways in which people are sending money and how that's challenging organizations. So let's, having lived in Asia for 12 years, and the same challenge exists, I know in the MENA region, you've domestic workers who are banking locally, but then sending money back to various countries, whether it's, and I don't want to stereotype here, but generally Philippines, Indonesia, money is being sent home, but they're not using the financial institution for that. Rather, they're using, providers of, yes, MSBs within the market to do that. And in some instances, it is your, general MSB, just I say kind of Western Union, different organizations like that. And in some instances, we're actually still seeing these individuals using Hawala networks for sending money. So can we talk about the challenges? There are millions of, expat workers, and then we could narrow that down in specific to domestic workers from developing and underdeveloped countries. Where is the biggest threat that we're seeing with the usage of MSBs who are processing these remittances, and how is screening technology helping these MSBs today?
It's actually a really interesting question. I mean, I want to talk about the really big players, like you said, because I think the big players actually have something. But you realize that, you've lived in Singapore, you've been through Dubai and places like that. There are many small MSBs. And I believe a lot of them do zero screening whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. You turn up, you might show an ID card, and then you can transmit the money. Right. In effect, that's what it is. So I think where the underground issue is if I was a launderer and I had to put small amounts through, I'd put them through MSBs because I've got a much higher chance of being less caught in an MSB than I would be through a bank, because they would monitor small transactions that end up going to some common counterparties. But an MSP, that is the nature of their business. That's how things go through, right? And it's not necessarily that they have the most advanced screening systems to actually track that kind of activity and say, and who's doing it, because they're not doing adequate checks on who's actually sending the money.
Yeah. One of the things I've actually come across quite often with domestic workers is the financial abuse that they're facing, where money is being sent home into accounts potentially registered in their names, but family members will have access to those accounts. And I remember one situation, and this actually happened to a lady that was working with me at the time, that her brother-in-law found the card to the account and basically stripped her entire account of the monies which he used for his gambling addiction. And she lost everything. And I said to her, well, why would you go to the police? And she said, well, I can't, because it's a family member. I'm just going to have to build it all my funds back up again. But then the question is, given the fact that she was working overseas and this was known to the bank, how did nobody identify this sudden typology on the account? You know, it was fraud, and it was a fraudulent typology. But, you know, one of the things I think we need to think about, it's not just about name screening as well. It's about identifying behaviors and typologies within these accounts to protect vulnerable people whose accounts could otherwise be compromised by, you know, usage by unauthorized persons. I don't know if either of you have come across that situation or any discussions around what we potentially do to better protect these underserved individuals.
I think what I'll start with this is that those victims sometimes can be abused by the people sending the money as well as the people receiving the money. That's the problem. And it happens a lot out here, especially in Southeast Asia. We are seeing not just domestic workers, but we're seeing people who just have, like, you know, the jobs that don't allow them to open up bank accounts, right? Or don't allow them to have a decent bank account. So, you know, it could be a contract builder. It could be a contractor in some other way. Now, the reality is, you're right. You know, there are victims of labor abuse, there are victims of sexual abuse, there are victims of financial abuse on one end. And then on the other end, you're right that a close relative or somebody receiving that can actually take advantage of that situation as well. And you're right that I don't think today there are typologies, whether you look at a big organization or a small one, that actually tracks this behavior. Because sometimes you don't know what if you're the creditor and you don't know what the debitor is doing, and you can't actually match some of that information up. That's one of the challenges. But even just getting all the debitor behavior, you know, if they've structured it in such a way that it looks like a normal transaction, it's a very, very hard pattern to do. But I agree that, look, what will change when somebody's abused is either the frequency, the value, or certainly, and those patterns are completely missed today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Go ahead, Nader.
Yes, and to add the point here regarding MSBs, majority of MSBs use in their transaction monitoring system, as I say, static typologies. However, they need to convert to dynamic typologies based on behavior, based on perpetual KYC, just to target the behavior of their customers and how. Because as said, Nitin said that in MSBs, due to structured payments, it's very hard to tackle any red flag through a static typologies or red flags. In addition to that, I think MSPs also should have not to screen against local or foreign watch lists. They should screen, in addition to that, on open source intelligence. They need to screen against newspapers, negative media, because this is very essential when you are doing a structured payment in a low amount. If there is any criminal record for a party, or there, as you said, addiction on gambling, there is something, bankruptcy or something like that, it would be triggered not on a sanction list, it would be triggered on open source intelligence. As I think MSBs, the main risk in MSBs is terrorist financing, in addition to fraud. So this is very essential to tackle, and this enhancement should be taken in their systems to be more efficient.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, I know that we're not going to kind of be touching on terrorist financing today, but it's one of those areas that I really feel is underserved in terms of our controls within organizations. And what I mean by that is, when you see a training presentations on anti-money laundering and CFT, you will literally see 2 slides on CFT. And the challenge we have is most of the money that goes to terrorist organizations is from legitimate sources. It's not from laundered. Of course, there will be money that's coming through illegitimate activity, but a lot of money sent to terrorist organizations is from legitimate funds, and it more is about belief systems. So there's a massive, yeah, exactly, NGOs as well. There is a massive amount of work to be done there in successfully.
And I want to pinpoint on your point that the minimum, there is a low amount, or there is a low number of SARs that are reported to Financial Intelligence Unit related to terrorist financing.
Yep.
And this is an indicator that the teams in any financial institution or any reporting entity, they are not able to trigger such events, or they are not able to trigger such red flag or suspicious behavior. As you said, it should be an increase in awareness in typologies, how they need to think, their analytical skills in order to tackle such typologies or such threats in terrorist financing.
Absolutely. I'm actually quite happy to see in recent discussions with the launch of AMLA, I saw a recent interview with Dr. Marcus Player where he was specifically talking to terrorist financing. And for me, I believe it's a massively underserved area within our industry, because just call us, just say it as it is. We don't actually have the right typologies, training, expertise to identify unless there is a hit on adverse media or a sanction screening list. And that's really the honest truth. So moving away from that kind of can of worms, because that's a little bit of Pandora's box there. We're going to talk now a little bit about PEP screening and sanction list screening in MENA. And the challenges we have here specific to the region in terms of, the challenges in screening, the sanction lists, what are the main challenges the compliance officers are seeing when screening PEPs in the MENA region? Don't know who wants to take that first.
Nathan, please go on.
Yeah, no, I think, look, apart from the transliteration issue, I think you hit it on the head. It's the RCAs, right? I mean, there is a lot of this kind of transfers going on. You do not know whether there are relations and close associates involved in this thing. And then, as Nader will tell you, there's a lot of variation within the names within the MENA region, whether they're in local alphabet translation, but also in Latin alphabet transliteration issues. There's there's honorifics. There's all sorts of other things that really cause big challenges, and working out people's actual addresses. To really fully identify them, to locate them, to say who they are. These are some of the challenges I've seen constantly, and much more challenging, I would say, in the MENA region than perhaps other areas too. So Nader, maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, I wanna mention a point here regarding PEPs. Here there is no defined notion how to define a PEP in a major of the countries. Certain countries define a PEP as a public official who is running his position for 5 years. Maybe if he stopped running his position more than 5 years, it will be considered a PEP or not. What about close associates? Are there close associates are triggered by the system? They are shown in the hits? So these are the main challenges. In addition to that, there is no unified criteria by the regulator about the sanction system capabilities. Does this sanction system covers machine learning nowadays? What about this model? What about this code? How we are managing these names, the sensitivity of the hits? Is there any cap regarding the hits that are shown as let's say above 95%? Because I think putting a cap is a very full action regarding cap for a hit. No, we need to ensure that the sensitivity analysis based on coding, based on machine learning, based on certain triggers and combination between the names and certain triggers, and to include the date of birth, to include the country of origin, to include also the residential area, the residential number in certain countries that we have here in the MENA region, in order to decrease the false positive hits and to ensure more efficiency. So these are the challenges. It is based on it is a responsibility between system provider, between the regulator and the client or the institution that they are using this system.
Yeah. Since we're kind of we're touching on, in particular, the Middle East. And I don't want to go right into different types of financial products, but I think it's important here that we do talk about trade finance while we're touching on this. Trade finance is increasingly becoming one of the most costly areas of compliance, if not the most costly area of compliance in the business, because of the sanction obligations that exist. And we are continually finding that it is not the direct exposure, but the nexus that's causing a lot of enforcement action. So I don't know, and obviously, Nitin, with your previous experience in some large financial institutions that deal with these products, this is a problem we're still not solving. And is there anything that we can better do to support, providers in the market in trade? This obviously was an area that FATF specifically addressed whenever they were looking at Dubai or United, the UAE in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant issue. Trade finance actually streams everything, right? So we've got fintechs on the low end doing invoice financing, and that's trade financing. And then you've got the big companies and the big banks doing, letters of credit. The issue here is this is interesting. On the low end, there's very little in terms of UBO screening, PEP screening, sanction screening, and handling an invoice. There isn't much that they're doing in terms of validation and checks that you would do on an LC, right? So a lot gets away at the lower end, and actually, what we have found is that people have become smarter because as the big banks' technologies around trade finance have improved, they've shifted that towards the invoice factoring companies, and that's where a lot of this is now being released. And unfortunately, the invoice factoring companies are pretty prevalent in the MENA region. They're also very prevalent in Southeast Asia and APAC. And so this level of money laundering is going up. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of trade finance deals still are in US dollars. And there is a change in the regime in the US, as you know, and the use of US dollars for certain types of transactions, which I think could open up a Pandora's box of issues there. But more importantly, I think, is the fact that even the biggest players in trade finance, they have to have multiple cells. Like I'll give you an example. Commerce Bank has multiple cells across the globe because one unit alone can't handle the trade financing. You have to communicate with other regions. You've got to find out what other people know regionally, locally, culturally, and then decide whether you trust the list, whether you trust who's connected, whether they've got adverse media and other aspects around those people. Because you will not have it all from one system or two or three checklists. You just want to having that network and able to rely on that network and collectively work at screening trade finance LCs and onboarding, etc. is really critical.
Yeah, I love the fact that there's a multiple different points. Sorry, Nadir, maybe you want to just touch on that first. There's multiple different discussion points in there that I think we should just touch on. But Nadir, you had a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment regarding here to integrate natural language processing in order to, as an AI tool, in order to review contracts, bill of lading, in order to make the process more efficiently and to have a system that compare prices of products and goods in order to ensure that there is no trigger for over invoicing or under invoicing between the markets, and to conduct enhanced due diligence through open source intelligence and negative media or adverse media related to parties. Because as you mentioned, the trade-based money laundering thing is about the nexus, not the parties that are involved in the transactions. However, they are between the indirect parties in the transactions and their nexus related to sanctioned parties or cartels or criminal parties or sanction evaders that are trying to use these trade-based transactions in order to evade sanctions or to execute such transactions.
Yeah, it was interesting. And then the reason why I'm really, really interested in this specific discussion point was I actually posted this on LinkedIn last week, a comparative analysis of the expansion of China as a trade partner. And one of the key things that we had seen was around the digitalization of obviously the yen. And the reason that was done was in particular to create a competitor to the US dollar as the main currency in trade. And if you see the change over the last 20 years of China as a trade partner, I actually posted it on my LinkedIn. It's an incredible map that just shows that the change over the last 20 years. And why this is important is in terms of sanction screening. A lot of people, their capturing of US sanctions is because of their usage of US dollar, not their US exposure, but rather that they're using US dollar.
USD currency. Yeah.
Exactly. So if we're moving to seeing more international trade from China using the digital yen and trade finance. And that's removing away the need then to apply OFAC screening because you're no longer operating in US dollar. Let's just take this as as if this hypothetically is the situation. There's a big change there in a multipolar world where sanction regimes are contradictory to one another. And, living in Hong Kong, I saw this specifically back in 2019, where we did have some real challenges in sanction regimes that were opposing against one another. And the question was, well, who do we follow? Do we ring fence the business for this jurisdiction? But to Nitin's point, when it comes to trade finance, you need to be a global player within your organization to share data. And then you have the problem of data privacy and sharing data across
between
multiple
countries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are we shooting ourselves in the foot here? Are we ever going to be able to solve this challenge?
Onnagh, I think the problem is getting worse. So I agree that, look, China is trying to mandate that a lot of the trades in and out of China are in digital yen because it's trying to establish itself as an alternative currency. But what I'm also finding is that actually a lot of Chinese SMEs open up Air Wallets accounts in US dollars and they want to be paid in US dollars. And what they're doing, and China should be very worried about, is they're actually doing tax evasion because they don't pay tax on it to China, right? So China has to, if it wants to do this, it's going to start controlling some of its own behavior inside its own country, because if you can open up virtual accounts, with other providers, get out of the system, still conduct trade, you're missing out on your sanctions, you're missing out on the control of your dollar, and you're missing out on various other things. So I think actually in a multipolar world, I think our life is going to become really difficult. There are going to be contradicting sanctions, multiple sanctions lists, see what applies to who, and the rules around which regime works and doesn't work is even more difficult. I don't even know what kind of we will not have an international criminal court to go to as well, right? So it'll be an interesting world to play in.
It's interesting you mentioned there about, kind of offshore currency capturing, and we see this time and time again where there are currency thresholds in terms of how much money people can send outside of, for example, China on an annual basis. But what we're seeing is accounts being set up overseas where money is not entering China but circumventing that restriction. And I've seen this come on my desk many times over the years. And the question is, well, we know that the currency restriction, well, it was previously, 100,000, then it was 10, now it's 10,000. The question is, where does the legal responsibility sit to notify authorities of this? And sanction screening and name screening is one thing, but is it the duty of the organization to notify the Chinese authorities where we see people setting up accounts to circumvent money thresholds in terms of amount of currency that can be stored or held outside of the country? And that is something, I don't know if you've seen it, Nitin, but I've seen it come on my desk many times. And the question is, do we raise a SAR on this? Or how do we keep this account?
You're hitting it right on the head, right? So far, the global world has had extraterritoriality from the US, right? So OFAC sanctions, whenever you use US, if you use US in China, US Japan, US in Dubai, you're still up to US sanctions control under OFAC, right? Now, I think what we're going to see is probably extraterritoriality by other nations. And this is where the big problem is going to become. Like, if I'm dealing in yen and I'm dealing in the middle of Africa in yen, and I'm buying a product from Portugal, right? Now, and there's a sanctions hit, do I have to report it back to the Chinese sanctions authority? And that's likely to become the reality. I mean, if we see multiple players impose extraterritoriality, it kind of actually kills the whole trade function a little bit too. We're already seeing a slowdown in trade for other reasons, but we're going to see it because of the geopolitical nature of how things are playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm conscious that we have around 10 minutes left. It's still a lot to get through. So we're probably going to have a part 2 to this webinar. One of the questions that's come through was actually specific to NLP, which you mentioned, Nader. And I'm an absolute AI enthusiast. In fact, I just completed an AI and compliance certification training program for raw compliance the other day, which we're going to be rolling out with AML Watcher. on how we're using AI within the compliance space. In Pacific, obviously, one of those discussion points is NLP in terms of, fuzzy matching, name normalization, aliases, contextual explanation, and obviously name
Name strings.
disambiguation.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
could you talk to that a little bit, in terms of how we are really seeing the positive benefits of NLP in name screening?
Yeah, actually, NLP is used for scanned documents or PDF files regarding such as bill of lading, invoices, or contracts. So natural language processing, you can screen based on in a scanned document, take the names, take the fields that you are tackling it in order to screening against local and foreign watch lists. So it's not a structured field. It's not a structured document. It's a scanned document, like a bill of lading that we receive from a client if he's using an LC or any documentary credit. So, or a contract, in order to screen the parties directly from these documents when we are uploading them. So they tackle it, they read it, and the NLP have the ability to read such documents and take the feeds and take the such triggers in order to screen them against local and foreign watch lists. And this will be effective and efficient in analyzing certain transactions and minimize the time for certain complex transactions and their effective controls or due diligence that will take place.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't know, Nitin, if you have anything to add on this. I know we're going down an AI kind of rabbit hole here.
Yeah, no, I think look, NLP and Gen AI as mechanisms to handle some of this information, getting it translated, getting it contextualized, I think is definitely a great approach. I think like one of the things we just got to keep on watching out is the biases in some of the systems, right? Because whether we don't know how the NLP is trained, you don't know how the Gen AI is trained. Does it bring a Western bias? Does it bring a bias that has existed for many years, perhaps against the people of the MENA region, right? And does it do that? So what I would always say is, look, there's got to be extra controls, and then also always do model validation. Whether you build your own system or buy a system, do model validation, refine them, talk to your vendors, refine the kinks, and then get it tuned and get it working for your organization.
Absolutely. And, we are at the infancy in terms of AI functionality within the financial crime space. And, NLP is just one area that we're seeing AI use cases happening. And we're a long way away from predictive analytics because of our data sources and the challenges with data. So watch this space. It's a really, really interesting area. And as I mentioned, AML Watcher and Raw Compliance have been working together to develop an AI and compliance training certification, which hopefully should go live beginning of next week, or actually, should I say beginning of in May. There we go, May. So you heard it here first. Great. So with 8 minutes or so left, I'm just looking here to see if there's any more questions that have been coming through from this audience. We've touched on one on NLP. One of the questions I'd like to talk about is just last but not least, reg tech adoption and how are banks working with the regulator in sandboxes to get regulators more familiar with technology use cases in this space. Because one of the things I'm still struggling with, we're talking a lot about technology and AI adoption, but it's all very sporadic. And I still think there's a lot of education to be done, not just within the industry, but also with regulators. So maybe Nader, are you seeing many kind of training opportunities or upskilling opportunities happening within the market for practitioners and for regulators in this regard?
Actually, yes. Regulators now, they are very convinced that RegTech is the future for compliance or fighting financial crimes in financial institutions. So they need to have a clear model between them and financial institutions, how they need to implement this, either in their regulating practices or either in the financial institutions' practices that they are using. So this model is now in the hot topic in the market, that how we can integrate AI, machine learning, or such RegTech applications in our work as a financial crime compliance practitioners. So this is the dilemma here. Does RegTechs will take the place of the professionals, of financial crime compliance professionals? My answer is definitely no. We need, because this models require an input. require data, require statistics, require certain people that they are validating it, testing it regularly, ensuring that there is an independent testing from scientific, quantitative, qualitative, in addition to rigorous internal audit practices on such systems to ensure that such RegTech are operating properly and giving us an output, recognizable output to take decisions on it on a solid basis. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Technology will never replace people.
Yep.
Definitely not within our lifetime. And that's something that I keep reiterating. Rather, we're using the technology to remove the monotonous processes that are reducing our ability to think, and rather enabling us to focus on the key risks and to think more. So we will always need people complementing these systems. And in fact, one of the discussion points, I'm going to be at a conference in a couple of weeks in Dublin, and we're going to be talking about digital twins, where they kind of clone you real time so that you actually have a digital twin that works with you. And I'm really interested to see these use cases and how this is going to work, especially in respect of screening and determination of SARs. The expression is no SAR shall we get left behind. And I'm always curious to see how we're using technology to ensure that the SARs are not only structured and informed in terms of their submission and contents, but also that we're making sure that FIUs are receiving all of the data that they need without being inundated with, should I say, CYA, cover your ass SARs, which unfortunately...
Defensive SARs. Yep.
Yes, exactly. Defensive SARs. It's a much politer way to say it. Yes, I should probably, but I like CYA. I think it kind of hits the nail on the head. It does what it says on the tin. So let me say, so just kind of then summarizing what we spoke about today, we have covered a multitude of different areas. We have jumped from screening into fraud, into terrorist financing, into trade, obviously into AI and the usage of NLP, data subsets, public-private partnerships. I have to say, anybody that's attended this webinar today definitely got their money for their buck, so to speak, in terms of the time you've invested. Yep. But let's kind of wrap up a little bit by summarizing kind of some of the key points. So, Nader, if I could start with you, what are some of the key points that you would really ask people to take away from the discussion today?
Okay, first I wanna say for system providers to stop giving one-size-fits-all demo. They need to review the risk assessment for their clients before giving their demos, in order to give them an altered demo for their functions, for all the system capabilities. In addition to that, private-public partnership should be implemented, not always to be on papers. Should be an integration between public and private partnership to have a blockchain and local watch list and registries to ensure that data points are not cleared, and to use AI and machine learning, such as natural language processing, to have strings, fuzzy logic, and all of that related to naming. And I'm very glad to have this webinar with you both, and hope for further discussions. Thank you.
If I may add to that, Nader, without sounding controversial, when tech providers, one size doesn't fit all, as you rightly said, but tech providers need to make sure that they're being honest about their roadmaps in terms of the technology capabilities. Exactly. Don't sell me a product that doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, show me on your roadmap when it will exist. And too many times I'm seeing firms buying what they think is an all singing, all dancing solution. And the honest truth is that technology hasn't even been built in the back end. So I think that
they sell it, then they build it. So this is very fishy. Yep.
Yeah. And we need to hold tech providers accountable for this, because there is a regulatory obligation for organizations to invest in these products, and they're putting the money into it because they want to make sure they're meeting their regulatory expectations. So in an industry of integrity, we have to make sure that the product providers are selling us technology that we actually can utilize today. And if not available today, a clear roadmap of when we should expect those toolkits. Exactly. And that's something I'm really passionate about at the moment in the market, especially when it comes to the AI space. So I will then, I'm just conscious we got 1 minute. Nitin, I will pass it to you for your kind of key takeaways from today.
Yeah, very, very quickly. So whether it's name screening, sanctions, PEPs, or any of these areas, my advice, and I've seen a lot of compliance people don't have blind faith in technology. A great compliance officer doesn't believe what the technology tells them. You've got to have your inquisitiveness. You've got to have your training. You've got to verify what you've been told. You've got to validate what you've been told, and put some conscious thought into whether you're making the right decision on these things. You can be aided by other great technology things such as entity resolutions, understanding whether you're getting real-time or periodic information, and understanding, policies, priorities, etc., that we talked about during this call. So I'll probably end it that way.
Brilliant. So compliance officers, trust your spidey sense, so to speak. When you feel that tingle in your spine and you can't, all the tick boxes have been ticked. On paper, there shouldn't be an issue, but that there's just something doesn't feel right. Exactly. And that is, in all honesty, that is from working in the industry for 20 plus years, as I have, that has really been the situations where this doesn't smell right, but we've answered everything that we need to. But, there's something I don't feel is right here. So I think that's something which technology will never, ever be able to replace. So great point to end it on, Nitin. So Nitin, Nader, I want to thank you both immensely for your time today. This has been, from my perspective, a fantastic webinar. I have really enjoyed it. I think we're definitely going to
great host.
My pleasure. Thank you.
But on that note, to everybody, thank you so much indeed for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this webinar. If you have any questions, let us know. We will send out the checklist that we mentioned earlier about contextualization when you're assessing your data providers for screening. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Nader. And thank you, AML Watcher. And have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.